Hello and welcome to the morning show with Sybil Mulcahy and myself, Brian Daly.
Coming up today, they were sexually abused by their father from a young age. 3 Dublin sisters will be telling us about the impact abuse has had on their lives.
Well, my father used to click his fingers. When you'd hear that sound, you'd freeze and you'd hope that it wasn't you he was calling.
But first today, Joyce, June and Paula Kavanagh grew up in Ballyfermot in Dublin in the 1960s and were each abused by their father from a very young age. They made the decision in 1989 to prosecute their father at a time when sexual abuse cases were still covered up and swept under the carpet.
The sisters have since talked openly about what happened and say they have come to terms with their abuse but are determined not to allow the abuse define them.
Well, my father used to click his fingers. When you'd hear that sound, you'd freeze and you'd hope that it wasn't you he was calling. He'd often come in and click his fingers to get a cup of tea, change the television channel. Could be anything, but it could also be to be called to be abused. So you didn't want to take the chance, you couldn't risk it. So when you heard that sound, you didn't look around. And then eventually, if it was you he wanted, the click would come louder or he'd end up calling you. And the minute you turned to face him, he'd nod to indicate for you to go upstairs to be abused. You could be in the middle of playing a game, doing anything, and you'd be called for this. And it was just heart-wrenching. Like your heart would just sink because it was so awful and you had no power, no control to do anything about it. You just had to go.
And June, Paula and Joyce Kavanagh, very welcome to the morning show today. I have to say, in all my time doing this show, I don't think I've ever dealt with such a horrific story as the tale that the 3 of you have to tell about your father, who, June, not only abused the 3 of you, he also sexually abused your sister and physically abused your 6 brothers as well. Yeah,
psychologically as well. There was no escaping. Like, if you weren't sexually abused, it didn't mean you got off the hook. He had such a dreadful presence. Like, you knew if he was in the house, everybody suffered at his hands. And control and bullying. He appeared to be afraid of nobody, so everybody got the wrath. You just never knew what would set him off.
He was a very aggressive man, wasn't he?
Yeah, and sometimes, like, he'd never need to hit us. Like, there's 10 in the family, and by the time we came along, I think he was exhausted. But, like, he wouldn't have to hit you. The threats would be enough because you know what he was capable of.
When did the abuse start, Paula, for the 3? I mean, I know it was at different times for the 3 of you.
It was at different times for the 3 of us, but we were all very young. And even when we wrote the memories for the book, most of us started our memories older, the ones that we have in the book. But we all know that we were so small that you'd have to be picked up and put on either the press or the bed. So that's how small we would have been. So for most of us, I think it would have been around 4 or 5 when he started, and he would have been grooming you way before then.
And Joyce, it was a case that, from your memories, that it would have been happening every day.
Absolutely. I've no recollection of any day it didn't happen. Yeah, I think it happened daily. I think it happened to every one of us, and this really throws people off because you can't imagine somebody having that kind of sex drive. But I actually don't think he had. I think it was about control. To have absolute control over somebody was what got him off. You know, we had to do all the work when it came to the sex, like, you know, had to get him ready, had to put it in the right place, and, you know, it was nothing, absolutely nothing to do with sex.
And just on the whole control thing as well, he tried to sort of involve you as well in the act, so that you were sort of taking on the responsibility.
With every time that he abused you, the fact that you had to get him ready for starters made you responsible and made you take on the blame and the guilt of it. Also, because of the way the house was designed, you were the one who listened out for people coming up the stairs or somebody coming near you. So you were always on tenterhooks waiting for somebody to catch you. Not for a minute thinking they would catch him. It was they would catch you doing something. And you, even though you knew it was really wrong, the fact that your father's doing it is what makes it very confusing.
And you mentioned that the house there, Paula, the design of the house. June, do you think that was part of his motivation as well, to have it sort of in little warrens and little alcoves and things like that? That you know, it would be hard. You know, there were little corners he could get away with this type of stuff.
Absolutely, because he built most of the house himself. Now he hadn't a clue. Like, he put his hand to anything, but I mean, the house was falling apart. The electrics, the plumbing, the whole. He did the whole lot. And like, he could open a press and come away with the door or the handle, and presses went on a slant. He put a cup of tea down. It was horrendous. But yeah, he built it in such a fashion. Like, people did get confused coming into our house. They didn't know how to get in and how to get out. There were little nooks and crannies everywhere, and I'd say it was deliberate.
He also bred you to cough when you walked into a room. There was always little signals, wasn't there? Make noise.
Make a banging noise. Like, you wouldn't sneak up the stairs. You'd make your steps heard.
And that was never said. You were never told to do that. Everybody in the house just, it was like an unwritten rule. Everybody just did that.
And the sexual abuse that was happening to you at various stages on a daily basis, did you know that, you know, each other was being abused at any given time?
We'd say absolutely no, we didn't. But in writing the book, we realised that when he clicked, the first thought was, I hope he doesn't want me. So somewhere, absolutely, you knew, just not on a conscious level. It's like we knew to stomp up the stairs rather than sneak. We knew, but we didn't know.
So it was never spoken amongst yourselves? No.
There was unwritten rules in our whole upbringing, and the entire family were part of it. But it was never spoken about, and it would never have been on a full conscious level, and therefore it's quite hard to describe to somebody or for somebody to understand unless you've lived in it. You know what the norm is in your home, and you just fall into place.
It's also because I think how abusers actually work and how to get away with it is based on secrecy, but it's also about isolating somebody. It's about making them feel they're the only one. It's something about that particular, about you. So in order for you to take on the responsibility, they have to get you to a mindset where you are completely taking the ownership of it, and therefore you're never likely to tell anybody because it's your shame, it's your guilt. So who would you tell?
When it started from such a young age, I can imagine that it was just something that it was all you knew, that you just fitted into your daily lives. Yeah. And I think there's episodes where you might have been abused and then you go outside and play on the street.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 minutes later you'd be out playing, red eyes. But then it was normal to be crying then. It could have been crying for anything. No one asked questions. And culture actually supported that, because the big thing in them days was you never spoke outside about what happened. What happened in the family stayed in the family. And that didn't necessarily have to be about abuse. Like, people, there was a lot of shame then. People were poor. There was very little they had, you know. So you didn't want to broadcast. If it was rows, I mean, that was the days when men hit women. I'm not saying they don't now, but then it would have been no problem to walk around with your black eye. Yeah.
But you as a family were relatively well off in Ballyfermot, is that right?
Well, we appeared
to be. You appeared. Your father was successful on the outside. He had shops, you know, he was very creative. Yeah. He looked like a successful businessman.
He also looked like a family man. He looked like he was into his community. He loved children. He was always doing something for the kids. Yeah. That was his thing. He was always selling the fact that family is very important, you have to stick together. That's why he created the businesses, so he could employ all of his family, so we'd all be together. I know. But that was the way he worked. It was
keep you close, probably.
But also because he could then control everything you did. So he controlled what you did in the morning, what work you did, what money you had, where you went, your freedom. Everything was tied up in that being in that one house.
And while all this was going on, I presume he was also controlling your mother by keeping her in the shop at the front. Just to talk to us a bit about that.
We had a sweet shop at the time, and I suppose that's why people would have thought we were well off. But the sweet shop was at the side of the house. It was originally a garage, I think, and Dad converted it. But to leave the sweet shop to go into the house would have been an absolute disaster. So you had to ring a bell to be relieved to go in, to even go to the toilet. So there'd be no surprises. Man, we'd never walk in, you know, surprised. You'd have to ring the bell. Somebody'd have to go out and relieve her to allow her to go to the toilet.
Otherwise, everything in the shop would be robbed.
Do you think, your mother must have had an inkling, though? I mean, if the whole 10 children, 4 sexually abused, all the boys been mentally and physically abused, how would she not have realised
something? The same
something?
way we knew, the same way I described to you, the unwritten rules. She was as much a victim of him as we were. And we've written about this, we've confronted, we've discussed
She was controlled by him.
She met him at a very young age. She was churning out baby for years, and she was tied up. I mean, there was no disposable nappies at the time. She was constantly working, and when she spoke to us about when we were children, if she showed any affection to any of the children at all, he'd end up bashing them. So she began to slowly shut down, and by the time we came along, she was nearly unavailable physically and emotionally to us, and it's taken us years to understand why.
And to herself, in fairness. She wasn't
She just
available
built
to
a
herself.
wall around her heart, basically.
It all came to an end at different stages for yourself. But June, you actually said no one day. You just confronted it and said, when the click came, the signal, you said...
I was very upset one day. Joyce had gone into town with a friend of hers and wouldn't bring me with her. And I even told her to be father, and he wouldn't come to my aid. So I stormed up the stairs, very upset, crying, lying on the bed, and I was sobbing, and I was inconsolable. And next of all, I heard click, click, and I thought, like, he can't be serious. I mean, I'm devastated here. And I heard it again, and I thought, it was just. I don't know where it came from, where I got the courage from, but I just said no. But as I said it, and the realisation of what I said, I froze on the bed and waited, because I thought I was going to be absolutely murdered. But nothing happened. And after a while, I looked over my shoulder, he was gone. I checked to see, was he waiting for me in his room, because you had to pass through his room to get down the stairs, and he wasn't there. So I ran out to play, and I thought, you know, I'm not going back in for a while. I couldn't understand it. But then you're riddled with guilt as to, if it was that easy, why didn't I do it before? I didn't know I had the power. And maybe I'm part of the problem. You know, all these questions go through your head, and you begin to doubt the role you played in it. And it's another nightmare.
He was eventually caught. The whistle was finally blown after he abused a grandniece.
Yeah.
Was that right? He ended up, he went to court, and he got 7 years.
He got seven sentences of 7 years.
But to be run concurrently.
Concurrently.
Because of his age.
He got out after 5 years for good behaviour, which, you know, it staggers belief, really.
Was there any remorse, even at sentencing, even when you confronted him? Did he show any remorse?
On the day of the sentence in the court, he got up and sacked his free legal aid team.
And asked us
were we finally happy. And
no,
I mean,
I think he's a sick man. I don't think he had any concept of the damage he'd done. And I think even at that stage, he was thinking more about what we were doing to him.
And you even say that in some ways now, at a distance, you feel pity for him.
Absolutely. He
was sooner be us than him.
Yeah. What a waste of a life.
Yeah, it was a waste. And when you think of, like, I mean, he lived to, what, 75 or something? And 5 people turned up at his funeral. I think that's so sad. So sad.
Very finally, you've written a book, as we mentioned, Click Click. And what are your hopes for this book?
We have many hopes for them. One is that we really feel this book could help frontline workers that work with children or adults who have been sexually abused. We feel that the child's perspective that's put in the book is really significant. And we believe we just feel we want to send a message out that if you have been abused, it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. And people might look at us and think, yeah, well, you're fine, you have your sisters, I have nobody. But in fact, it's a journey, really a personal journey you have to take on your own. There's nobody in your head. And ultimately, we didn't have each other, really, until about the last year or two. Yeah. We've really bonded, and that's down to Marion Quinn, who helped us write the book.
And the book is called Click Click, and one of the subheadings is A Shattered Irish Childhood, but it's great to see that you've put things back together again quite considerably.
And people who'll be watching this morning will say, God, look at them laughing. And, you know, but that is the way, that's the way that you have coped to get over such a tragedy.
We had, probably some people probably say it was a sixth sense of humour, but we did find funny things in everything, and there's always a funny side to everything, and that did help us heal.
Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us this morning.
And I know the book has gone to #2 on the bestseller list, so a big congratulations and many thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much.